All right, so moving on to the next segment. I'll be sharing my fight summary on the fight that took place in the UFC 303 co-main event between Diego Lopes and Dan Ige. So we saw Diego Lopes defeat Dan Ige in a catchweight fight at 165 pounds, and Diego Lopes defeated Dan Ige by unanimous decision in a 3-round fight in the co-main event of UFC 303. Now, I was not seeing this coming, and let's talk about this because for on the road for UFC 303, we were on a term of wild terms of events in the UFC. I mean, the UFC 303 card was supposed to feature at once upon a time or at one particular moment was supposed to feature Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, Jamal Hill, Brian Ortega. Four of those names I just mentioned didn't even make it to the UFC 303 event. And Brian Ortega was supposed to fight Diego Lopes, who both respective featherweights took this fight on short notice, on a 2 weeks notice. And we didn't even get that fight. I mean, Diego Lopes and Dan Ige fight at a catchweight at 165 pounds to save the co-main event at UFC 303. I mean, Brian Ortega was ill. He had 103 degree fever, was unable to step up and go. Dan Ige stepped up and texted Dana White and Hunter Campbell on a 3-hour notice and wanted to step up and texted them saying, I'm ready. I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm ready for this opportunity. Please don't take it away from me. And Dana White and Hunter Campbell gave Dan Ige the opportunity. It was absolutely wild that we got from what was Jamal Hill was supposed to be in the co-main event, a light heavyweight fight. We were supposed to get a featherweight fight between Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes, and it ended up being a catchweight fight at 165 pounds between Diego Lopes and Dan Ige, who had no business even being on the UFC 303 card, let alone the co-main event. But in terms of the fight, I thought the fight was pretty good. We weren't for a fight we weren't supposed to get. I mean, Diego Lopes looked good landing strikes and controlled the pace of the fight with solid grappling and ground control. I mean, Dan Ige was getting going, landing some strikes in the 3rd round, but this only being a 3-round fight, that was when Diego Lopes basically won 2 out of 3 rounds in my eyes and picked up the unanimous decision win. And I really thought that Dan Ige did fight pretty well. I mean, I don't know when he was supposed to fight. I think he was supposed to fight in July this month in the UFC, but he was already in training camp, already in shape, apparently in the best shape of his life. So for you to step up, I don't even view him as a loser. I mean, for you to step up on a 3-hour notice, get to the T-Mobile Arena and compete in a UFC co-main event, that's ridiculous. But hats off to Diego Lopes, man. I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, Diego Lopes went through a lot. He was supposed to fight. He went from taking this fight on a 2 weeks notice, just like Alex Pereira and Yuri Prochazka did, to fight Brian Ortega at the featherweight division. When Brian Ortega was ill this week, he let the UFC executives know that he couldn't get the 144, 145 at the featherweight division. And it was supposed to be a catchweight fight at 155. If you're Diego Lopes, you're already agreeing to do a catchweight fight at 155 because Brian Ortega is admitting that he can't cut weight properly. Then you get to the arena, you don't even know if you're gonna fight or not, and then you find out you gotta weigh in all over again. Dan Ige is your new opponent at a catchweight at 165 pounds. I think Diego Lopes deserves. I hope he got a bonus from this from the Dana White and the UFC executives. But that's crazy to me that the tournament events. I mean, hats off to these MMA UFC guys because I don't think in boxing, hell no, in boxing they wouldn't do an offer that late. For that to happen is pretty remarkable. And Dan Ige saved UFC 303 co-main event. Because if that didn't happen, Diego Lopes was not going to have a fight on the card, and that would have been a card taken away, a fight taken away from the card. That's just mind blowing to me how that just happened. What's next for Diego Lopes? I think Diego Lopes should be moved up in the featherweight division rankings, regardless if he fought at a catchweight 165 pounds. What I just said a few moments ago of how he went scheduled to fight at featherweight, then catchweight at 155, then fought at a catchweight at 165, and still picked up the win against Dan Ige. I feel like he has to move up in the featherweight rankings. And even if he did beat Brian Ortega, who right now is currently the third ranked featherweight in the UFC, I thought, I mean, if he did beat him at the catchweight of 155, I think regardless he should have moved up. But he definitely deserves his props and definitely deserves his credit and should be moved up the featherweight division rankings. I still would like to see Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes by the end of the year. I think that's a fight to revisit when Brian Ortega is healthy, or can possibly go through a full training camp, not a 2 weeks notice. Same with Diego Lopes. I think that's a fight to revisit by the end of 2024. Two featherweights jockeying in position to see where you can end up in the rankings by the end of 2024, see how the division plays out, whether Ilia Topuria still holds the featherweight title, or Max Holloway holds the featherweight title, or whoever holds the featherweight title for 2025. So I think that's a fight we definitely should get at some point by the end of the year between Brian Ortega and Diego Lopes. But that is my fight summary on the fight that took place between Diego Lopes and Dan Ige at UFC 303 co-main event.